Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Today we're diving into the world of hitchhiking, where a seemingly innocent ride can quickly turn into a nightmare. Buckle up, because these stories are not just about picking up strangers, they're about encounters that will make you think twice before ever letting a hitchhiker into your car. Get ready for some eerie, unsettling tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's jump right in. Story 1. The Man with the Bag. I'll never forget the night I picked up a man with a duffel bag on a stretch of highway. It was late, around 1 a.m., and I had been driving for hours. You know those long drives where your brain goes on autopilot and you're barely aware of what's happening? That's where I was mentally. So when I saw him on the side of the road, I didn't think much of it. He was standing under a flickering streetlight, looking exhausted, with one arm raised and a large duffel bag at his feet. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but that night, I don't know. Something made me stop. The guy looked rough. His clothes were dirty and his face was hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. He tossed his bag into the trunk without saying much and climbed into the passenger seat. The first thing I noticed was that he smelled terrible, like stale sweat and something else I couldn't put my finger on. But hey, maybe the guy had been through a rough patch, so I kept driving. I tried to make some conversation to break the silence, asking him where he was headed. He didn't really give me a straight answer, just grunted something about needing to get to the next town. His voice was low and raspy, like he'd been screaming or crying. I didn't press him for more details. The whole vibe in the car felt off, like something wasn't right. But it wasn't until I noticed his constant glances toward the trunk that I started to get really uncomfortable. Every few minutes, he'd shoot these quick, nervous looks over his shoulder, like he was afraid something or someone was going to jump out of the trunk. I couldn't help but wonder what was in that bag. The tension in the car was thick, and the more I noticed him fidgeting, the more anxious I became. His hands kept twitching, his knee bouncing up and down as if he was trying to control some deep, hidden panic. At one point, I asked if he was okay. He just shot me this strange look and said, "I'm fine, just drive." My heart was pounding at this point. I had no idea what was going on, but I had the overwhelming urge to get him out of my car. Every second he was in there, it felt like I was sitting next to a ticking time bomb. My eyes kept darting to the trunk too, almost instinctively, like I could feel whatever was in that bag. The smell in the car started to get worse, more pungent, like something rotting. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over on the side of the road and told him that this was as far as I could take him. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He just got out, grabbed his bag from the trunk, and walked off into the darkness without a single word. I sat there for a minute, catching my breath, trying to calm down, but curiosity got the better of me. I don't know why I did it, but after he disappeared into the distance, I got out and checked the trunk. My hands were shaking as I opened it, half expecting to find something horrible inside. The trunk wasn't empty. There was a large, dark stain, wet and thick, like blood. I slammed the trunk shut so fast I almost caught my fingers in it. My mind raced with a million questions. What had been in that bag? Had I just given a ride to a killer? What if he had decided to turn on me? I floored it the rest of the way home, hands clenched on the wheel, constantly checking the rearview mirror to make sure he wasn't following me. I kept imagining him showing up in the middle of the night, knocking on my door with that same duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I never told anyone what happened that night, partly because I still don't know what I picked up, and partly because no one would believe me. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone late at night, I think back to that night and the man with the bag. I wonder where he is now, and what was inside that bag. Story 2. The Lost Boy. It was raining heavily that night, one of those downpours where you can barely see 5 feet ahead of you. I was driving back from a late shift, exhausted, just wanting to get home and crash. The roads were slick and the storm was making it hard to focus. That's when I saw him, a little boy no older than 10, standing by the side of the road, completely drenched. He looked so out of place, standing there all alone in the rain, with no adults in sight. My heart sank. What was a kid doing out here by himself in the middle of a storm? I pulled over, rolled down the window, and called out to him. His clothes were soaked through, and he had this lost, scared look on his face. He didn't say much, just asked in a quiet voice if I could take him home. I couldn't just leave him there, so I told him to hop in. He climbed into the back seat, dripping water all over the car, but I didn't mind. I asked him where he lived, and he whispered an address I didn't recognize. I plugged it into my GPS and realized it wasn't too far away, maybe 15 minutes. I asked him what he was doing out there alone, but he just stared out the window and didn't answer. The whole drive was unsettling. The rain pounding on the roof, the boy sitting silently in the back, the cold air seeping into the car. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, but he just sat there, staring out the window, never saying a word. We eventually arrived at the address he gave me, but when I pulled up, I felt a chill run down my spine. The house was completely abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds. It looked like no one had lived there in years. I turned to ask the boy if he was sure this was the right place, but when I looked back, he wasn't there. The back seat was empty. I whipped around, thinking maybe he'd slipped out of the car without me noticing, but the door was still locked. My heart started racing as I checked every inch of the car. Nothing, no sign of him, no wet footprints, no dripping water. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The rain was still coming down hard, but all I could think about was that empty house and the boy who had disappeared. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, so I did some digging online. Turns out, a little boy had lived in that house years ago. He had gone missing one night, walking home from a friend's house. They found his body days later, not far from where I had picked him up, hit by a car on a rainy night just like this one. I haven't driven that road since. Story 3. The Hitchhiker Who Knew My Name. This happened about a year ago, and I still get chills when I think about it. I was on my way home after visiting a friend, driving down a mostly empty road at night. It wasn't too late, but the area I was in was pretty remote, so there weren't many cars around. That's when I saw him, a man standing by the side of the road with his thumb out looking for a ride. I'm usually pretty cautious, but something about him seemed normal enough. He was dressed in a worn-out jacket and jeans, nothing out of the ordinary. So I pulled over and asked if he needed a lift. He smiled, thanked me, and got into the passenger seat. We started driving, and everything seemed fine at first. We made small talk, nothing too deep. I asked him where he was headed, and he said he was just trying to get to the next town over. He seemed friendly enough, and we chatted for a few minutes about random stuff. Music, the weather, that kind of thing. Then, out of nowhere, he casually said my name. "So, where are you headed after this?" I froze. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't mentioned it at all. My stomach dropped and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. Trying to stay calm, I asked, "How do you know my name?" He just smiled, this weird, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know a lot of things about you." My heart started racing. I didn't know what to say, so I just kept driving, my mind spinning. Who was this guy? How did he know me? Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get him out of the car, but I didn't want to freak him out. I tried to play it cool, acting like it was no big deal, but my pulse was pounding in my ears. After a few minutes, I told him this was as far as I could take him. I pulled over, trying to keep my voice steady, and told him to get out. He didn't argue. He didn't say anything, actually. He just got out of the car, but before he closed the door, he leaned in and said, "See you soon." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't wait around. I sped off, my heart racing, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. I half expected to see him chasing after me, but he was nowhere in sight. Thankfully, I never saw him again since that night. Wow, those stories were intense, right? It's hard to imagine the fear and uncertainty these people faced. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling tales, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends, if you dare. And don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts or any creepy hitchhiker stories you might have. If you want more eerie content like this, subscribe and stay tuned for our next video. Until then, drive safely, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the scariest encounters happen when you least expect them. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.